Hi guys, so I've been saving up a few questions for a video for a while now, and I thought I'd do it this week. And actually there's a theme to quite a few of them, which is all about improving practice sessions and improving your training, improving your efficiency in practice as well. So I'll cover those in a bit. But the first one comes up an awful lot. And it's all about how I sit. A classic question I get is my guitar on a stand, for example, which it's not. Or how do I sit, or what's the best way of sitting if you're playing the guitar? So I thought I'd cover that in more detail and actually focus on how I'm sitting, focus on how I support the guitar. Now, when I play the guitar, actually, I can slouch around just like everyone else as well. But there is always one posture that I use whenever I'm recording, whenever I'm taking my playing seriously. I always sit in the same way, and it's the way I sit when I do these videos as well. And basically it's the classical guitar posture, the classical guitar sitting position. So let me see if I can zoom up from the ground up and show you what's going on with my body while I'm sat like this. Okay, so let's see what's going on from the ground up. So you can see, to start with, my left foot is actually on something. So my left leg is raised slightly, and actually all I've got here is, it's an old cookie tin. Ben's Cookies, if you're ever in Oxford. Ben's Cookies is the place to visit. But that gives me maybe 4 inches or so, something to just lift my foot up a little bit, and lifting that foot up raises the neck. Okay, now the guitar body itself is pushed against my stomach, so you can see certainly the back part is, and I actually put the front part forward a little bit, and that puts this arm in a nicer position. If it's flat against the body, then my elbow's stuck out backwards, so I like to just move it forward maybe 2/3 away along my thigh, just there. But you can see here the guitar's in a stable position, so I don't have to hold the guitar at all. I don't have to be touching the guitar. The guitar's stable and it stays in this position, which means my hands are not involved in supporting the guitar at all. They can just focus on playing. Now, the other advantage of having the neck at an angle like this is all about managing this wrist position. It's keeping this wrist in a much more neutral position. So if the guitar was flat, if the guitar's like that, you can see that my wrist has to tilt like that in order to get around the neck. Yeah, and that's reasonably uncomfortable. Whereas when it's like this, my wrist tilts at an angle and it's a much more neutral position. Now the other value of having the neck up like this, again, is about the wrist position. So when it's low, when the guitar's strung low, you can feel that this wrist is bent at an angle, whereas when it's higher, you can have that wrist at a much more neutral position as well. Okay, so that's why I like sitting like this. Okay, so the next question was this. It was, how can I improve my accuracy in my tremolo technique? So he was talking about, the classical guitar tremolo technique that I use when I do my fast picking. Now, the approach that you can do to this is actually a general purpose technique, so it's not just applied to the tremolo effect. You can use this in a whole host of different scenarios, which is why I thought I'd talk about it. The basic principle is this: if you can highlight your mistakes, if you can make it really obvious about when you go wrong, then you're going to be able to correct for them more of the time. There are often techniques where you can sort of fudge the mistakes, you can sort of stumble through, you don't notice them so much, and so you allow yourself to get away with them. And the more you do that, the less of a training effect you get out of that. So the more you do of the right stuff more often, the better you're going to get at it. The more mistakes you make, the more you allow yourself to make mistakes, the more you'll get a training effect on those mistakes as well. So the idea is finding out ways of highlighting when you're doing things correctly, and when you're making mistakes so you can correct for them. And so that's really what this technique's about. Let me see if I can demonstrate. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and make the mistakes really stick out. And the way we do that is we mute some strings. So we're going to mute the B string just with this hand, and we're going to mute the D string, and then we leave the other strings to ring. So the E will ring, B's muted, G will ring, D's muted, A will ring, okay? And now we're going to practice the tremolo just between the D and the B string. So all we'll hear are clicks when we do it right. Yeah? And of course, when you go wrong, you hear one of the strings ringing. So that tells you straight away you've gone wrong. Makes it really obvious. And of course, you can always drop the fingers down properly and make sure your tone's okay. And then lift your hand up again and get back to practicing the tremolo. And the other nice thing about this is because the mistakes really stand out, it's a kind of practice session where you don't have to be fully active. You can be passive when you're doing this. You can be, I don't know, watching video, watching a YouTube video, watching my channel if you like. As long as you pay some attention to what's going on here and you're correcting your mistakes, because the mistakes really stand out, you can correct them really easily, you recognize them really easily. And that's the nice thing about using this as a technique. It's a great way of really emphasizing where those mistakes are so you can correct them. Now, when you do these kinds of things that really highlight the mistakes, you start to realize just how often you're screwing up, which can be sometimes a little bit demoralizing. And especially when you do a technique like this and over 2, 3, 4 days, you don't feel like you're improving at all. That can be demoralizing as well. But actually, you know, burning my fingers, I don't know whether you remember my video last week, I talked about burning my fingers just before I did that. And you can see, I don't know whether you can see, the blisters are starting to heal now there, just there as well. But they're still mending, and this is well over a week later. And when I see something like this, you know, it reminds me that my body has a natural rhythm about it. Stuff doesn't fix itself overnight. Stuff can take weeks to correct itself. Now, I've got no doubt in my mind at all that in 2 or 3 weeks, my fingers will be back to normal again. These marks will have gone, the scabs will have gone, and the skin will have healed and everything. But it takes 2 or 3 weeks to be able to really, really see that difference. And the same's true when you're trying to develop motor skills, which is what we're trying to do here. We're making physiological changes to our body. We're changing the way our brain works and the way our brains communicate with our muscles as well. And that stuff takes time. And so you have to give yourself a break and allow yourself the time to make those improvements. Now that leads quite nicely to the third question, which came up in a conversation I was having with someone, which was, how do I get better at this technique? Now the technique really doesn't matter, but basically what he wanted to do was improve as quickly as he possibly could. And for me, that really is about practice and about training density. It's about training or practicing as efficiently as you possibly can. Now, I've covered this in previous videos. One approach which is really quite useful, certainly when you're talking about structuring a practice session and structuring a day, is the Pomodoro technique. And I'll put a link somewhere about that in this video as well, so you can go and check that out. But you can also use a couple of tricks to sort of micromanage your practice sessions as well, and that's what I thought I'd talk about this week. And the approach that I'm going to show you in a moment is great for when you want to do that kind of active practicing, when you want to get that 100% focus in the thing that you're practicing. So it's really good for that. It's really good for things like speed training. It's really good for techniques that have some kind of stress or some kind of stretch associated with it. It's great for those kinds of things. It's great for phrases that you can chunk and you can loop. Those kinds of things work really well for this as well. And it's a great way of getting your practice session as efficient as you possibly can. Let me see if I can demonstrate. Okay, so hopefully you can see on my iPad, I've set up a stopwatch, and we'll be using that in a moment. And the exercise I thought I'd drill, and you can use this for any kind of exercise really, is a nasty little sort of a extended pentatonic scale. So I've got down on the 5th fret. As you can see, there's big stretches in here. And all I'm going to do is sort of descend in 5s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And come up in 5 as well, and just cycle around that. And that's the exercise I want to work on. Now, obviously, I could drill that for 20 minutes, but if I did with that kind of stretch going on, my hand's going to be throbbing like nobody's business by the end of it. But what I can do is I can use this stopwatch. So what I do is I start that, and I wait for 5 seconds to tick by, 4, then I start. And I keep going until 20 seconds have passed. There. And then I take a break until 25 seconds, and then I do go again. And then I take a break for 5 seconds till 45, and then I go for another 15 seconds. And you keep on going like this. So as you can see, I'm doing sort of 3 mini practice sections every minute with 5-second breaks in between each 15-second practice session. And you keep on going on like that. And what you find is that because you're doing this, you've got full focus on what's going on. You've got things happening all the time, which keeps your interest and keeps you focused. And because you've got those mini breaks in there as well, your hand's getting enough of a break from the stretch for you to be able to keep playing much longer than you could if you didn't have those mini breaks in there. And also you're working on the setup and the finish of the phrase as well, as much as you're doing the phrase itself, which is really important, because obviously when you're actually using this in an improvisation, you have to be able to drop into it and come out of it again. So that becomes really important. And you get that out of this as well. So it's a really powerful way of increasing that training density that you need when you're doing these kinds of exercises. Now you may be amazed at just how efficient you can be when using a technique like that, because you're just not distracted by what's going on around you. You've got this 100% focus in what you're doing for 20-25 minutes while you're doing a technique like that. You're not allowing yourself to be distracted by your phone or by what's going on around you, because you're constantly checking that stopwatch and you're waiting for the gaps and the intervals to go and start and stop. It's really efficient if you give that a go. It's really worth having a go at. Okay, so final question then. Should I practice my guitar with distortion on or not? Now, the answer to this is it depends, not too surprisingly. If the technique that you want to practice is dependent on distortion, if it needs distortion for the technique to work, then obviously you have to practice with distortion on. There's no other way of doing it. But if it doesn't, then it depends on the aspect of the technique that you want to focus on. Because you have pros and cons with using distortion or using a clean guitar, and it depends what you're aiming for. So for example, distortion masks dynamics. So when you're playing quietly or playing loudly, the distortion will hide it. Distortion tends to mask the tone. So the tone is, you hear the tone much more when you've got a clean guitar, and distortion will hide that. So if those are the things that you're going for, then you need to get rid of the distortion. But distortion enhances string noise. distortion raises string noise. You know, on a clean guitar, I can let the strings ring really quietly. And play a line, and the line is not really affected by the string noise of the ringing going on the other strings. If I had distortion on this guitar and I did that exact same thing, then that whole line would turn into mush because the distortion just raises that general string noise. So distortion is really good at helping you if you're wanting to do things like string control, string noise management. If that's the thing that you're focused on, then actually I do switch my distortion on when I'm doing those kinds of practice sessions. Again, because it's highlighting the mistakes so I can correct them. And that's when I use distortion when I'm practicing my guitar. So that's it for this week. Something a bit different. Give my fingers a bit of time to heal themselves after I burnt them. And we'll get back to some more playing next week, maybe. Anyway, let's chat then. Bye-bye.